Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to our Investing in Food Systems Transformation event. It's so wonderful to have you all here with us today. And I'm really excited to moderate the next couple of hours that we're going to spend together. Today's event is hosted by the Biovision Foundation, together with Transformational Investing in Food Systems, TIFS. I'm actually not from either of those organizations. I work at the Grateful and the ETH Zurich World Food System Center, both organizations equally as committed to transforming our food systems. So I join you here with that shared interest and commitment today, and really look forward to guiding us through what is a really interesting program that we are going to enjoy together. Now, I'm very aware that many of you have probably spent more time on Zoom than you perhaps would have liked to over the last couple of years. That said, we do just have a couple of housekeeping points that we would like to share with you, just to make sure that our time together is running as smoothly as possible. Firstly, we kindly ask if you could please keep your microphones on mute. We have a lot of people joining today, a lot of wonderful contributors, and so that just makes sure we have a great audio quality for everybody. We would, of course, though, love to see your faces. So please feel free to turn on the camera and make sure that we can see you and you can participate visually in this program as well. We also have something available for you today as people are joining from all around the world. We have simultaneous interpretation available in English, French, and Spanish. So the instructions for how to utilize that have been dropped in the chat box for you already, but you'll find a small globe at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And if you click on that, you'll be able to select the language that you would like to hear today's session in. So regardless of the language of the contributor, you'll be able to receive the session in the language that works best for you. Now, if you happen to have any technical challenges or need some IT support during our time together, please don't contact me. I'm unfortunately not able to help you, but we have a wonderful team here with Lena and Tony and Bree from Niole, who are supporting the organization technically today. And if you look in the chat box, you'll also find their telephone numbers and other contact details should you need to reach out to them and get some technical help with your participation today. So you'll see all that information in the chat box as well. Now, we were blown away by the people signing up for this event today. We actually had over 600 subscriptions coming from 95 different countries. And I think that just speaks to the incredible interest and importance that we all feel for transforming our food systems, the shared passion we all have here about the role of agroecological, regenerative, and indigenous approaches to doing that, and specifically the importance of investment in charting our way forward and in really leveraging our impact in this space. And that's exactly what we're focusing on today in this event, Investing in Food Systems Transformation. As I said, we have people joining from all around the world. So before we dive in, we thought it would be really nice to see where you're joining us from today. And I'm going to hand over to Tony, who's going to take you through a little activity to help get a better visualization of who's in this virtual room with you today.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. So as you're seeing, I'm sharing my screen here, and we have a map of the world. And Lena's going to drop this link to this map of the world into the chat so that you can click on it and you can interact with it by clicking on this little red plus button in the top right corner. And from there, you can either type in your city or your name, and your location will show up. And so you can just click on, if I'm from Paris, France, I can do that, and I could put my name in here if I want and just hit publish. So go ahead and use this little red button to let us know where in the world you are from on your own screen. I'll zoom out here. And on your own map, you can zoom in if you like with the little plus or the minus button at the bottom of the screen. We truly have a global audience today. All right, and I'll hand it back to you, Michelle.
Thanks a lot, Tony. As you said, incredible to see we're really spanning the entire globe with participation today. And what brings us all together is this shared interest in these nature-based approaches, whether that's agroecological, regenerative, or indigenous, to tackle these urgent food system challenges that we're facing. And today we really want to focus on how we can scale up these approaches and what role does investment play. And so what we've done for you is brought together some really interesting enterprises and investors from around the world who are going to share with us their stories of success, the challenges that they've faced, and really give us both inspiration and also insight into what we need to do to chart our collective path forward. So we have some really inspirational enterprises and individuals with us today, and we want to showcase their work through a number of different formats. So we're going to start our session today with some framing inputs from a couple of contributors, and then we're going to move into 2 panel discussions. So our first panel discussion will look at enterprises and investors who have been focusing their work on building local and regional supply chains and systems. Our second panel discussion is going to look more at enterprises and investors who have focused more on global and export markets in the work that they do. So we hope that through that you get some contrasting perspectives on really interesting and concrete initiatives that are already happening on the ground. We are also going to have a little break for you in the middle where you have a chance to share some of your insights, your perspectives, what you're taking out of the session so far. And finally, we'll wrap up with a couple of closing contributions for you. And if you would like to follow along on the program, you're going to see a link in the chat now, which gives you the overview of the program. So feel free to reference that at any point where you'd like to know where we are or where we're going. So with that in mind, I think it's a perfect time to actually hand over to our first contributor. So I'm really happy to introduce Frank Ihorn, who's the Executive Director of the Biovision Foundation, but he also has another hat, and that says the steering committee member of TIFS.
Il est également membre du comité.
I think we just had a challenge with the translation there for a moment.
Que se canceló la interpretación.
Okay. Sorry, so if everybody else had that challenge, just clicking on the globe at the bottom of your screen again, selecting the language you would like, and that should keep you back on the channel. So Frank, I was starting to introduce you and saying your 2 roles at Biovision and TIFS. And I think it's also interesting you have, over 20 years experience working in development cooperation with a strong focus on agroecological approaches, organic approaches. I've done some work with you as well in a lot of policy arenas where you really try and push these agendas forward. But coincidentally, I actually live on the same street as you. So I get a chance to walk past every day the amazing vegetable garden that you grow, which I think is just a nice example of you're really connecting with this topic, also getting your hands dirty in the soil. So the perfect person to set the scene for us today and give some insights into why these agroecological enterprises are so important for food systems transformation and the work that you're doing at Biovision and TIFS. Thanks a lot, Frank.
Thanks so much, Michelle, and a warm welcome on behalf of TIFS and Biovision Foundation to all of you. Wonderful to see so many familiar faces and exciting to be here. Yeah, Michelle, you mentioned that I'm a hobby gardener, but I mean, we are talking about farmers who need to earn their living, so that's something really different, isn't it? Nevertheless, in my work career over the last 23 years, I worked always on sustainable agriculture and in a development context. And I realized over time the critical role of small and medium enterprises for food system transformation, whether they work for input supply on the production side, aggregation, processing, trade, retail, support services. So this huge number of small enterprises which are doing the job on the ground, which food system transformation would not be possible without them. But they need the resources, they need investments to do this work. So how can we best support them? That kept bothering me quite a bit. How can we facilitate investments? How can we overcome the hurdles to invest in them? And this is, I think, also the basic start of the TIFS initiative that we did together with the Global Alliance and the Agroecology Fund. So this is also the basic idea of this, organizing this event. Now, coincidentally, the key role of investing in small and medium enterprises also was confirmed by the Food System Summit, action tracks, and in the many dialogues that happened all over the world. Various solution clusters and coalitions have come up with these themes. So we see also from there that we are on the right topic. You will hear me talk quite a bit, or hear today quite a bit about agroecological businesses. We sometimes call them agroecopreneurs. So I was given the task to very briefly explain what is agroecology, that we are all on the same side. And you can just show this first slide, please. You will see there that agroecology is basically a concept, a holistic concept, which is built around 13 principles. Now, I don't see the slide, but now it's coming, which are integrating the farming part, all the areas of soil, water, crop, livestock, trees, and so on, but also address the wider food system. So where the whole value chain is coming in, where also consumers are coming in. And I think this is very important to keep in mind now when we talk about agroecological or resilient, regenerative, indigenous food systems or enterprises, that we have this holistic perspective. Now, in order to identify inspiring and promising agroecological, regenerative or indigenous enterprises, Biovision, in collaboration with TIFS, have developed the business agroecology criteria tool. That's quite a mouthful. The tool has been adapted from an earlier version that has been used by various actors, including from the donor and finance community. Now, the extent to which an enterprise inspires is reflected in this tool, which we can see on the next slide, in its alignment with the 13 principles of agroecology. So you see in the spider diagram, again, the same principles, and here for a given enterprise, an example on how it performs on all these different principles. The extent to which an enterprise is promising, however, is reflected in its business model, in its value generation activities, and its scalability. There are a lot of background noises. Maybe somebody can mute the microphone. In this, identifying the promising aspect of the scalability, the tool differentiates between 3 types of scaling processes. The next slide, please. First, amplifying within, which refers to efforts to improve, stabilize, or speed up its activities. Second, the amplifying out strategy, which refers to efforts to increase the scale, for example, the number of stakeholders reached. And finally, amplifying beyond, which refers to processes that aim to change rules or values. Now, this should give you a bit of a conceptual frame for what we hear now in the upcoming discussions. Before I hand over back to Michelle, I want to give a quick glimpse on what Biovision's role is in that and what we are planning to do in the coming years. We will help to identify and promote inspiring and promising agroecological enterprises and also suitable funding vehicles so that they are taken up by decision makers. And together with the Agroecology Fund, we are currently conducting a feasibility study for an agroecology accelerator facility in East Africa that links promising agroecopreneurs with funders and investors. But now, without further ado, I wish us all an inspiring event and fruitful exchanges on how we can scale investments in promising agroecopreneurs. Back to you, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Frank. That's a really fascinating tool building on some of your earlier work. And certainly that's something that you can all look into the Biovision website and find out more information on. And I like this amplifying within, amplifying out, and amplifying beyond. That's a nice lens for us to chat with our enterprises today and hear which approach they've been taking. Thanks so much, Frank. So it's a pleasure now to bring somebody who's going to give us a perspective from a different region. So Charles is joining us from Uganda today, and he's the advocacy and campaign coordinator of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. And this is a really fascinating organization because it's really the largest civil society organization in Africa that's driving the transition to agroecology. And Charles, we've heard that you and your colleagues have been working on a really interesting research project to understand better what are the needs of the existing agroecological enterprises across the African region, and what can we do to better support them as they move forward in their approaches to amplify within, out, and beyond. So Charles, thanks for joining us today to share the insights from your research.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. Hi, everyone. Pleasure meeting you all, and I'm delighted to having been invited to speak in this very important meeting and to share with you the insight of the incredible work we're able to do in partnership with Agroecological Fund and with financial support from 11 Hour and Biovision. Rex, can you help me if you can put on my slide, you see on the screen? Yeah, thank you so much. So this work has been, the collaborative research has been going on the last 13 months. We concluded this year around June. Very, very incredible. We met a number of incredible people. I co-coordinated the work with Jane Austin, very incredible lady from the United States. Slides take a little bit long, but I can start to speak. Broadly, when we look at this, the project was titled Supporting African Agroecological Enterprises. Rex, one slide backward. And right, just probably the previous slide. Rex, can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you so much. The main purpose for this research was for us to analyze the existing African agroecological enterprises and the service providers to understand their roles and relationship to agroecological movement and markets. The insight of the research was quite fascinating. We shared with a number of stakeholders. One of the things that we're able to establish during the research that agroecological entrepreneurs in Africa are many and diverse. They range from farmers, growers, cooperatives, aggregators, processors, urban backyard gardens, and private companies, as well as the NGOs, the non-profits making. And the other interesting findings we make from this, next slide, right? That these enterprises, the agroecological entrepreneurs are engaged in varied activities, ranging from production and aggregation, processing, farm inputs, farm infrastructure, foraging, and cooking. which was quite fascinating, and the kind of the system and the structures they were using to make sure that this work and probably sustain the kind of the system they believe in. Next one, Rex. So one of the most interesting things that we were able to establish from this research, that almost 60% of African agroecological entrepreneurs, they have less than 49,000 US dollars revenue per year, and they have significant kind of number of years in businesses. More than 60% have been in business for between 6 years and above, which was quite fascinating. They have a lot of experience to share with the world, but one of the challenges they face, they don't have the platforms to engage and probably share some of this great work they're doing. Next, Rex. Another interesting finding from the research, that number of service providers involved in supporting African agroecological entrepreneurs and enterprises. For example, there are investors, accelerators, banks, technical assistants, providers, as well as NGOs. But though there are a number of key challenges that we're able to focus based on these service providers, one of the things was most of the investors, they focus on increasing production and income as a success, which was quite interesting. Another interesting challenges we were able to establish from the research, that some of these works, the investors start at the initial stage and they don't move through the whole process. The investors do not differentiate also between the agro-business that are agroecological and not. They just invest because they feel like there's an investment in agriculture. Though also there are opportunities that we're able to establish within the period of 1 year. One of them, that's the innovative service providers. Okay, yeah. Okay, sorry about that, Rex. Things. The innovative service providers are funding many businesses under 200,000 US dollars, but also some of the service providers are successfully working with multiple partners and to give them range of experience in terms of how they need to move forward with the work on supporting entrepreneurs as well as the markets in Africa. Next slide, right? Another interesting finding was the issues about the innovators gap, that most of these small African agroecological entrepreneurs, they lack financial support between $5,000 to $2,000. And most of them, around 80%, they self-finance or they get money from loans. Around 38%, they claim they get money from grants, and 21% get money from banks. But most interesting is about the barriers that we're able to share with us, that mostly the interest rates are extremely high for them to sustain their business, run their business, almost 30%. And also they have difficulties in acquiring loans, and also perception about agriculture in Africa, that they're risky, they're unreliable, and also they're sustainable. That to some extent has been affecting their level of engagement. But another interesting thing in terms of innovators gap was the question of launching pilots. Most people come and launch their nice pilots with them, and they're not willing to support them through the entire the growth stage of their businesses. And this makes it very difficult for them to cope up, but also be in position to consolidate the gains they've made at the pilot stage. Next. Another interesting thing was the question of territorial markets. A new idea which is coming, very, very interesting and quite captivating, that if a lot of investment and plans are put together, it can help. Issues about provision of fresh fruits, vegetable, grains, meat, milk, they are very important. And in terms of looking into question of the COVID, in the face of COVID, that's how do we put this question of territorial market to make sure that first they're resilient, and secondly, they connect, they provide a platform for transitions to agroecology in terms of the transformation we want to see in supporting African agroecological enterprises. Next, John, right. Another important input in our work in terms of the agroecology entrepreneurship, there are multi-dimensions in Africa. Once the linkage of sustainability or sustainable alternatives to industrial production system and holistic land management was very profound in most of the works they were doing. And then the closer connection between the growers and eaters through territorial market with the participation of farmers and communities in the system of governance, which lead to fair share of profits and co-creations of knowledge and benefits. Next, John. Next slide. Very fascinating was the role of women and young people in terms of promoting African agricultural enterprises, that youth have the most gain and women in terms of the success and also participation strongly. And the youth are seizing the opportunities, especially with innovations and the work of technology. They feel that's more things to deal with and employment challenges they're facing in Africa, but also how they need to leverage, make sure that they make a contribution to a sustainable food system. Though still their participation is lacking, and therefore there should be more deliberate process to make sure that their voices become very critical in this work we're doing. Next. The last and important findings we're able to make from this research is lack of supportive legal and institutional framework in Africa. That the question of certifications, having systems that sustain and promote this farming system is quite limited. Like from funding, most African governments, they don't have institutions and systems that give, stimulate this kind of farming system. Most of them are run in a very predominant, traditional and indigenous knowledge in terms of no opportunity in terms of infrastructure and support to make them run through. Allow me to end with the last slide in terms of, one last slide. Another interesting summary in terms of the needs, the smallholder farmer that resonate with the findings we made. One of the questions is a question of reliable markets. That if we need to support the transitions to agroecology and food sovereignty using the African agricultural entrepreneurs as the engine, they need reliable markets. So how can we support procurement programs to stimulate local market health, biodiversity, and entrepreneurship in Africa? So that's one of the things they need as much as possible, that there must be a procurement system that support them, either at the school level, as well as at the institutions of government, and having a system that help them move forward. The second interesting support needs from the smallholder farmers and African agricultural entrepreneurs who are able to engage is the question of loans. How can we provide small loans and support for smallholder farmers to produce, process, and market their production, and to create values-added businesses for local consumption in the local and regional markets? If there's kind of initiative to help that, definitely we're going to expand production, but also make sure that we're able to promote a system that will lead to very helpful food system and also support equitable development initiative in Africa and at the global level. Other things about the issue of input, quality and diversity production, mutual aid and support, good networks that can help them transition from community where the production happened to pre-urban and urban level, as well as moving cross borders. And the last and the most important thing is a question of enabling legal and institutional framework so that it gives them the basis of protection, but also give them the basis in terms of how they move forward. And the most important things, the smallholder African agroecological entrepreneurs, they need support. They need to be trusted, and then once they're trusted, then there's a platform for them to make a change. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Charles. That was a really fascinating insight into your research. And I think everybody would love to know where they could read more about that and perhaps read the full study. So if you have a chance to drop in the chat where everybody could learn more, that would be really wonderful. Thank you. And you did such a great job of outlining both the challenges and the opportunities in your particular region. And that links very nicely to our first panel today, where we are going to look at specific stories from entrepreneurs and from investors who have really been working to build local and regional markets for agroecological, regenerative, and indigenous products and approaches. So I'm really happy to invite Krishna Gopal, Dale, Stephen, and Anna up onto the stage, or the virtual stage. I think we are having some challenges getting Dale into the Zoom meeting. I'm not sure if he's on his way, but we'll just get started and hope that he can join us.
Michelle.
Okay, wonderful. So you can hear us, we just can't see you. Great. Thanks so much for wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us. So we felt like you're all doing such interesting work, and rather than me summarizing it for everybody, that we would actually start by giving you each 1 to 2 minutes to share with us what's really the core of your work? What's the main goals you're working towards, the main activities you're involved with? Perhaps, Anna, would you like to get started with your work at the A-Team Foundation?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Anna van der Heerd from the A-Team Foundation, and we are a small family philanthropic office based in the UK. And we have been looking at food and its impact on human and environmental health for over 11 years. And just a little background, and I actually came from a non-philanthropic background. Started at the foundation, it seemed very peculiar to me that a lot of foundations didn't align their investments with their grants. And it turned out that actually the charity laws in England didn't support that. So it was only in 2016 that these were actually aligned to support impact or mission related investment, as opposed to just maximizing on return. So the UK is a little bit behind in terms of being able to, well, I mean, catching up now, but it took some time in terms to be able to actually charities to legally be able to align mission with investment. So we now focus on both our investments and our grants focused on food and food systems.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Anna. Also coming from the investor side, Stephen, maybe you could share with us what you're doing at Grounded Capital Partners.
Sure. Grounded Capital Partners is something that we founded in the last year, really after about 13 years of exploring a thesis for how we believed the food system might be evolving, and the opportunity to use those changes to invest financially focused capital from soil to the consumer along the value chain in ways that would drive more regenerative and agroecological practices at scale across different categories of food. And so initially, I was very focused on looking at the opportunity to decouple the output from these more regenerative and agroecological operations through branding or adding value or vertical integration in order to capture more retail margin at a farm level and get people paid for these better practices. For the last 3 years, I've been more focused on the demand end of the supply chain, working with food companies and retail companies, looking at opportunities to create demand for that output. And one of the things I had observed was that us included, there were a lot of people focused on building supply of more regeneratively produced ingredients, but without more demand to support that, a lot of the change didn't seem to be durable. And so our work at Grounded Capital Partners is really focused on working with mission-driven food companies, looking back up the supply chain, considering every stakeholder along that supply chain to then create demand and support farmers who want to farm in these ways.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, Stephen. Heading over to India now, Krishna Gopal, would you like to share with us what you are doing with Access Livelihoods?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm Krishna Gopal, and I'm speaking from Hyderabad in India. We are from Access Livelihoods. Access Livelihoods for the last 15 years has been working with women farmers, both rural as well as tribal women farmers in India. We work with 17,380 women farmers. We help them organize into cooperatives or producer-owned companies. And these producer-owned companies aggregate the produce which they produce in their farms and help them to aggregate value from the market through a common brand called Creo. And during this process, we help reduce the levels of intermediation within the agriculture production system and the food system, and help build efficiencies, effectiveness, help the consumers in the urban areas, nearby urban areas to get food which is safe, healthier, and more conscious. So that's the primary purpose, helping the women to integrate into market systems and help them get 70% of what the consumer pays.
Wonderful. And did you share how long have you been in operations for?
15 years.
15 years, wonderful.
Oh yeah, 15
Thanks
years.
so much.
And we've been, the producer companies are doing very good business. In fact, some of them have grown to, multiple $1 million as their own turnovers, and they are able to access these markets, especially conscious consumers who are willing to pay a premium and buy these food produce because they are directly being serviced from the producers.
Wonderful. We're going to come back to that in a moment. I'd love to hear first from Dale. Do you want to share what you're doing with community markets for conservation in Zambia, though I believe you might be in Ethiopia at the moment?
Right. Thank you. It's so wonderful to be able to join you after quite a struggle to get back online. But we're basically a food processing company, but by purpose, we're much more than that. We build market value for small-scale farmers from conservation, and we're really responding to problems that we saw 18 years ago. Incredible land degradation from small-scale farmers that live way below the poverty level, and it's an absolutely crazy business model that you want to build a food industry around very poor, unskilled farmers. So it has taken us some time. We have over 230,000 small-scale farmers now that are working with us. We manufacture 18 different food products. We do value addition to add value for farmers to earn more income. And we find premium markets in the export market. We have found that our small-scale farmers using regenerative farming practices have allowed us to go into the organic food product market. We're exporting now to South Africa. And we really think there's an enormous potential from small-scale farmers who literally farm with their hands in a very careful way. They can provide very nutritious food products. We've had partners that have helped us to analyze the nutritional value as compared to conventional farming. So we really think we're onto something and giving great value back to the farmers, providing much more food and income security while also providing good security to the environment. So that's basically what we do.
Great, thanks. Now, I just saw there's a question in the chat to say the name of your organization again, and that's Community Markets for Conservation in Zambia. So Anna
and our brand is It's Wild. Sorry, I may not have mentioned that. It's Wild is our brand.
Wonderful. Thanks for the clarification. So we have Anna and Stephen sharing more from the investor side, and Dale and Krishna Gopal really sharing their perspectives with concrete enterprises. And I'd like to start there. Dale and Krishna Gopal, you've both been running for many years, and you mentioned multiple figures which are representative of success, but there's been a lot of different impacts your organizations have had. What do you think have been the key elements for the success that you've had? Perhaps Krishna Gopal, you could start with sharing those ideas from your perspective.
Yeah, so I think just to add a little bit more number of numbers is that the business that the women do today is around $20 million, and they are able to sell this produce by adding value, and there are around 26 different products that are being sold by these women. Now, how has this been possible? I think I can attribute the success to 4 different reasons. First, our ability to connect conscious consumers in the urban areas directly with the women farmers who have become entrepreneurs today. Second, the level of intermediation. In India, it's very clear that in agriculture, we have at least 8 to 10 intermediaries. And that's the reason today farmer earns anything around 18% to 30% of what the consumer pays. So we have reduced that levels from 8 to hardly 3. And that allows us, the farmers, to aggregate 70% of the value which the consumer pays. The third is by integrating women. Feminization of agriculture is very clearly happening within India. Farming is under a constant stress because of climatic factors, also because the income realizations have been very poor for the small and marginal farmers. And therefore, in our producer-owned companies, we have given primacy to the women so that they can aggregate the value in the entire process. Fourth is to build a regional food system. Regional food system focuses on a system where You procure the agriculture commodities and organize women within 25 kilometers and sell the produce in the markets within 100 kilometers. The opportunities that we see as we move forward is that there are many consumers in the urban areas of India willing to pay a premium of 20 to 30%, which we call it as affordable premium, for safe, healthy, and traceable food. I think it is important to emphasize on traceability because many people claim that produce is from regenerative agriculture or agroecological based system, but it's important to prove and be authentic in this entire process. Second, there has to be increased soil organic matter that improves resilience, productivity, and quality. So soil organic matter and soil moisture content are the two critical parameters on which local inputs have to be worked out, not the externally loaded chemical inputs. So that's the biggest opportunity, that the transition from chemical inputs to the local inputs. The third is in integrating technology, which will track the behavior changes as the farmers adopt agroecological process, is a big area which can be explored in the future. So these, I feel, are the key factors to success and the three opportunities that we have as we go on. The challenge, of course, is to look at blended finance models, and agroecology is a systematic process which has to be built over 4 to 5 years with the farmers, and it requires blended finance. Grants, debt, and equity have to be intelligently combined. Technology penetration within the rural area is very low, and we still struggle to, even though India boasts to have the lowest digital data costs in the world, we still struggle to reach the rural farmers with technology. And women are not recognized as the main contributors to agriculture within India because it's largely a patriarchal society, and the rights of land are with the men in India. So these are the challenges that we have been facing in the last few years.
Oh, thank you. That's an amazing summary. And I'm really interested to hear from you, Dale, what are the key factors that you've had for your success and what mirrors or is different perhaps to what Krishna Gopal just shared from his context?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll obviously, a lot of the points that he mentioned would be points that I would have mentioned. So I'll pick some things that are different. One of the real key factors of our success has been a quick learning curve on developing a very low cost but efficient extension support system that quickly to being increasingly driven and led by cooperatives that we have formed. And it has allowed us to do so many things so much more cost effectively. One of which is to reduce the cost involved with a very difficult supply chain across very difficult landscapes. It is, I guess a lot of people who may not have been in this part of the world can't imagine how we could possibly break even bringing purely organic or naturally produced food commodities using totally regenerative soil practices. With a lot of agroforestry, we plant between 40 and 50 million trees every year of a particular species that has become vital to reducing the cost of the farmer, increasing the yields, and ultimately reducing the labor cost. And building that kind of set of benefits has created an incredible synergy with the cooperatives and the farmers that they represent. And we've struggled to do this, and I think they've appreciated our efforts, and we ask them to do the conservation, which has also given rise to opportunities through the carbon markets, which we're currently benefiting from, which is helping to breach that magic line of sustainability. So that's been one really important area of work, which has been facilitated, of course, with really smart use of ITC systems that the cooperatives and their own staff are now able to use. And with our manufacturing centers, we have 4, to coordinate very efficiently the dispatch of trucks to collect the raw materials, etc. They also monitor their own farming practices. We verify that, but ultimately it's verified by a carbon verifier. And that increases, again, additional income to the cooperatives to sustain what they do, which brings down our cost. I would certainly echo the sentiments of the previous speaker that, maybe this will be my final point. We have, I think, and I've seen a lot of different efforts to protect landscapes, protect biodiversity. I firmly believe that small-scale farmers is the answer if they have a good proposition and they can make those changes. And that's going to require a model, something like what we do. But we have to buy from more farmers so they can get that market value from conservation. We built the warehouses. We've invested in the manufacturing equipment. We've got a storage capacity over 15,000 tons. We're selling roughly 7,000 to 8,000 tons currently. But what is limiting us to do more and buy from more farmers is that god-awful word called working capital, where we need to raise finance. And so much of our margin goes to the lenders. And it's been very difficult to increase the value of what we buy from the farmers because we have to make sure we pay back our lenders. And I think that's where we have a dilemma. If we're going to do conservation with small-scale farmers, we're all going to have to give a little bit. We're a nonprofit company. We give back a lot. But if we could find partners that could think along the same lines we do, then we could save landscapes like we have here in Zambia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks a lot, Dale. That's a message we keep hearing today, right? The burden of debt financing when interest rates are just so incredibly high. And I think that's a nice segue to our two guests here who are coming more from the investment side and, of course, working in very different parts of the world as well. Stephen, in the US at the moment, what do you think is the factors that are making regenerative agriculture a really exciting investment opportunity for your organization and for others that you work with?
Well, listening to others describe what's going on in their regions, I find it so interesting to see how similar the dynamics are even in the United States, whether it's the economic profile of farming or what's possible in one region versus another, in one operation versus another. And one of the things that we've observed in the US is as demand for the output of these farms grows, and as there is more discussion and more awareness of these practices and the externalities of our existing agricultural production and food system, I've found that there is such a need to take more of a systems-based approach. And so often in the US, we look for silver bullet solutions to these systems-based problems. And what that means is there's an opportunity for a lot of collaboration. And if we were to start with capital, there's an opportunity for people to invest in different types of assets and get different types of exposure, whether it's investing in land or production on that land, or processing or food companies. But it also takes different profiles of capital. And I think the word blended capital was used. We found that collaboration between financially focused capital and philanthropic capital and even public capital really enables us to drive some of these changes. And it doesn't mean that they are necessary, all are necessary in every case, but they are interdependent. And in some cases, we can de-risk something with philanthropic capital that becomes financially viable. My focus has been more on partnering with others to invest financially focused capital. And so I guess in the US, what I would suggest is there's such a broad opportunity now to get involved in these programs. And without repeating what the others have said, many of the issues are very much the same. They're regional problems. And I think it's important that we think about this on a human scale. It doesn't mean that we can't create national or global solutions, but they have to be built from the fabric of regional solutions in more of a hub and spoke model from my perspective.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Stephen. And we'll come back to this blended financing question because I think it's one that keeps being shown it's important. Anna, how is it from your perspective, with a focus more on the UK? What are kind of the most exciting investment opportunities at the moment, and how can we really increase both public and private investment in whether it's agroecological, regenerative, or indigenous approaches?
So over the last, I don't know if anyone is aware of this, but over the last couple of years, there's been tremendous change in potentially agricultural law in the UK, and due to Brexit, we are leaving the Common Agricultural Policy, which the UK was a part of through its membership to the European Union. And so that's going to be replaced with ELMS, which is Environmental Land Management Scheme. And so that transition in itself has the potential to create great opportunity if both policy looks at it from food production as not just environmental, not just from an environmental perspective, but also from increasing nature-friendly food production in that scheme. And then also, it's very clear that alongside this sort of transition from a public perspective, we're going to need private finance to support this transition. So the opportunity is there, absolutely, to support this transition, but it also needs philanthropists and those working on campaigning to make sure that the policy is heading in the right direction. And these ELMs, these environmental land management trials, are inclusive of food, agroecological, regenerative food production. So there is tremendous opportunity now from both private, philanthropic, and public funding to support this transition. I suppose, one of the things that we're seeing is a shift in also philanthropic perspective on how food can be the vehicle to support climate and biodiverse and social issues that we're facing right now. When we started 11 years ago, there were very few foundations in the UK looking at this, and now through networking, and through Appetite, there's many of us that have now come together that are working collaboratively on this, both from a grant side, but also investment and economic side. And so I think that, the opportunity is there, but it's still quite fledgling in terms of, the vehicles that are there that we can support investment wise. I think there's the opportunity to scale up some great initiatives that are already in the UK. And I think, I would like to share a report with everyone that both the Career Chan Institute and the New Economics Foundation did on essentially that. It's how private investors, philanthropic investors, government can actually support this transition in the UK through investment. So I'll share that in the chat, but they give some great recommendations wherever you are within your investment strategy.
That would be great. Thanks for doing that. Yeah, we've heard blended finance, blended capital mentioned a few times. From each of your perspectives, what do you think are the most important things that need to happen to increase the availability and access to blended finance for agroecological enterprises? Anybody would like to share some thoughts on what we need to do there?
Sure, I would be happy to.
I would like to.
Go ahead,
Okay, let's go first, Stephen, and then Dale, and then I think Krishna Gopal also wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Sure. And we need different profiles of capital, whether it's equity, debt, or philanthropy. But what I've observed in the work that we're doing is that creating markets for the output is one of the most critical. So if we create markets for the output of these farming operations, not only does it get more margin back to the farmer, but it enables them to grow more. And so often I've found that a lot of the work even we've done to grow supply, no matter what the profile of capital is that we're providing, the change isn't durable if we don't create those markets. And I think that the need for capital and profile of capital depends on which part of the supply chain you're talking about. And sometimes it's equity, sometimes it's debt. And in some cases, it's an accommodation in a region that may be public support or philanthropic.
Great, thanks. Dale, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, yes, thank you. I think that there's not been a really good opportunity yet. I think it's slowly happening to appreciate the enormous, if I can say, food basket of healthy and well thought out ways to produce food ecologically here in Africa, and it's a tough area, but it also is associated with some of the most exquisite landscapes that are under enormous pressure. And I come back to this point that if we can link farming to the environmental challenges that we have on a real landscape scale here in Africa, we have the farmers that are the solution. But what is impeding that solution for a model like Kamako is an awareness of what the market opportunities can be from the consumer point of view. If you want to eat just your ordinary sort of healthy product that is maybe certified organic, or do you want to eat a product that's also organically certified, produced by a small scale farmer that's put down his firearm because he doesn't want to poach elephants anymore? I'd definitely go for the latter. And I think that's such an exciting way to look at food systems. And this is what we have spent the past 18, 19 years proving that it can work. And it's ready really to sort of wake up other people to that potential, because I still think that we don't need a lot of heavy mechanized machinery. We're not going to make a lot of small-scale farmers rich, and they're not going to go off and buy a John Deere, but they're going to have enough money to feed their families, send their kids to school, because they're better markets, and they can stay sedentary so they don't have to chop down the tree that they live next to. So we just need to think about those commercial linkages with the environment through the resource of humans in the form of a small-scale farmer, of which there are many, many out there that can play that role.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dale. And I think that's quite a unique perspective you have, because as I understand it, you came into this work from elephant conservation. So really seeing that interface of conservation and food production coming through there. Thank you. Krishna Gopal, what are your thoughts on increasing access to blended finance?
So I would suggest two things. First, how we have been able to access blended finance. It's been possible because I think the initial investments came from the philanthropic fund, and as businesses stabilized, the equity and debt funds started pouring in from both the banks as well as investors from outside. So this is how it has worked, but it isn't sufficient, because then you start very small and slowly build the entire scale. I see there is a huge opportunity, and if the equity and debt players are able to combine their resources with philanthropic funds right at the upfront and look at it from the startup stage itself, then the opportunity to transform the food systems is very high right at the beginning. Now, how can it happen? In India, for example, the key barriers that we have towards moving towards a blended finance is, first, there isn't sufficient awareness and knowledge about this. But if you look at a mainstream industry or a sector like infrastructure development always had access to blended finance models. They always had patient capital. They always had capital which could be returned after 4 years or 5 years of long investments. And these days, in fact, platforms and e-commerce industries are raising huge money where they run into losses for 7 years, 8 years, 9 years. That's because probably the investors are very aware about that entire sector and they're doing. But I think there's an opportunity here to educate everyone, especially the investors, that there is an equal opportunity even in the food systems. The investors can get paid sufficiently. The philanthropic foundations can be happy that they are able to generate impact, and everybody can benefit out of this process. If we have a legal framework where all these three can be financed together, that's the first if. The second if is India is just starting to look at social stock exchanges. which is the potential exit route for the investors. And if you want more investors to really invest into this process, we require an exit route to be created for the investors and to combine with the philanthropic foundations, grant money. And exit routes, one of the strongest exit routes is always an IPO, right? That's what they do in the mainstream fields. So if you have social stock exchanges, that could be a potential exit route, and India is moving towards that direction. So I feel that there are barriers today. Legal frameworks have to be improved, the market conditions have to be improved so that there are clear exits, and there has to be enough awareness around the equity players that they need to pool in money even at the early stage and combine it with philanthropic funds. And if this is done, probably there will be a bit much more scale. But otherwise, even if this is not going to happen, start with philanthropic fund and slowly you will be able to attract the equity and debt resources.
Yeah, really interesting. Thanks. And if you have any resources on the social stock exchange, I'm sure people would be happy to read more in the chat. So if you could share that would be great.
I'll do that.
Thank you. And this is a question then a little more on the, let's say, branding and communication side of things. Anna and Stephen, when we look at the terms we're talking about today, agroecological, regenerative, and indigenous, how are you finding these terms resonate with potential investors? Are you noticing that one resonates stronger? What trends are you seeing there? Anna, do you want to start off?
This is an interesting one, because I think nationally or regionally, these words are sometimes interchangeable and sometimes very opposing. And so in the UK, you're finding within the food movement that there's a split between agroecological, using the term agroecological, which, as I said, is now in the Farm Bill. There's a tremendous momentum to sort of move the agroecological transition. And regenerative is seen a little bit skeptically, because it is seen as being co-opted by big business. Although there is a movement in the UK that is looking at regenerative, I think with the inclusion of regenerative organic, you are seeing that sort of being sort of championed by the food movement, but to a less extent. Whereas, and Stephen will talk about from the US, but we also are invested in US projects, and regenerative is the word in the US that is being used. So I think it is very interesting, and we actually wanted to sort of even host a debate on the semantics of these words and what they actually mean to the individuals and to the communities, because I think even some people have issues with the word agroecological, I think, from the indigenous community. So it's an interesting interplay of language that I think mean different things to different people.
And indeed, as you mentioned, different in different regions. So how are you witnessing it, Stephen, in the US?
There's been an evolution. We spoke of regenerative for years, and just in the last year or two, as the conversation about regeneration and regenerative agriculture has grown, and maybe to Anna's point, has been co-opted to mean different things, we've started to actually try to use agroecological as well, so that our work doesn't get drawn into the debate around what regenerative means and whether or not it is what these people are describing. And there's, at least in the United States, I've observed there's such a tendency to want to put a stake in the ground and describe what something is. We have organic certification and other third-party certifications, which are great. And it's easier for people to say this is organically certified, so it's okay. But at least from my perspective, regeneration is more of a journey and a process and a mindset. And it's an application of that mindset and practices in trying to achieve outcomes that build the health of that system. And those things are harder to put into a single word. And so I think the word regenerative is very important in the US, and the word agroecological is being used less often. But I'm encouraged and excited about the fact that this is even in the discussion, which it wasn't in most circles 5 years ago.
Dale and Krishna Gopal, how is it from your perspective, these terms agroecological, regenerative, indigenous, how do you see the resonance both on the investor side, but perhaps also on the consumer side as your consumer-facing organizations in terms of attracting either customers or investors?
Okay, on the consumer side, the general response is that they want to be sensitive to the nature and environment. And if the food systems are really going to contribute towards, positive impact on the nature, they would obviously love that, right? But it still isn't the key decision-making parameter for buying food. The consumer still requires the convenience, and they want safe, healthy, right, and really accessible solutions, right? So also in markets like India, you always have the entire range. Affordability also becomes a critical factor. So affordability, access, and convenience, these going to be key factors in determining how we want to be. And authenticity, safety, and reliability, these are other factors which contribute to consumer choices. So while yes, they will be willing to pay a premium, but the key factors are much more than just saying that, we have a food produce which comes from regenerative agriculture or agroecological process. On the producer side, what we find is that in India, at least, there is a considerable amount of stress in the production processes. And water tables in India is really very low. Climate change has caused a lot of losses to the farmers, and agriculture incomes have been relatively very stable. And India continues to have 70% of its population dependent on agriculture. And most of them are small and marginal farmers who are not even able to, get anything around $2 to $3 per day, right? That's the standard that the World Bank and everybody is pushing for. And if you measure that in many farmers, at least 80% of small marginal farmers in India still don't have that kind of a income, which can be much more than that. So for the producer, I think agroecology is offering a solution to solve these stresses. First, by looking at diversity in production systems, you are addressing the issue of high amount of chemical inputs that are required. And at the same time, you're also addressing the susceptibility of monocrops with changing climatic conditions. Now, even if one crop fails, if there are multiple crops which are grown in a single farmland, there is a possibility of still getting some yield and surviving that particular season if the drought is not there. And that's the kind of a solution which is taking care of the risks that are there in agriculture production. It increases the income, and therefore the acceptance level is very high. But of course, the key barrier is, as Stephen was saying, it's about building behaviors of practices. And this does take time, and it's a journey with the farmers. So there will always be early adopters and there will be slow adopters. So we have to work with them over a period of time. They're open to these solutions and ready to opt for it because it reduces their risk and increases their income.
Great, thanks a lot. Dale, how has it been in your experience working with these terms?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. I don't know, people may have preconceptions about whatever comes out of Africa, but probably not the best preconception. So we really have a mandate to make our products absolutely safe, and we probably have gone far beyond even many companies in the U.S. To maintain the safety standards. And food safety, I think, is what people are looking for. Obviously, they're looking for a good story, I think, if they're really trying to understand the brand, what's behind the brand. And I think our effort has been to really tell the story of the farmer, because food safety begins and with sorry, that's my cat. Go ahead, go away, you. With eco-agricultural practices where chemicals are not used and are replaced by trees and the right kind of practices, farmers are providing that aspect of food safety. And then of course all of the expected requirements with a brand that can guarantee safe, healthy product. with strict controls with aflatoxin and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just a hard job to get all that done. And if you can get it done, then you expect to find a reward at the end of the day. We sent a shipment of our peanut butter to the United States, and no one told us that we had to pay 130% tariff. That's true, 100%, 130% tariff. So I think there's some disequilibrium in the way the global food market works if we're interested in global solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, marketing and communicating these challenges, trying to find people who want to listen and help us get through these bottlenecks, it does take the kind of financing that's patient, but confident that in the long run, they've got a winner and will stick behind us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And thank you both for bringing up this aspect of food safety and how important that is in particular contexts in driving a lot of decision making as well. So thank you all so much for your really interesting contributions and for sharing with us your experience really already implementing agroecological enterprises or finding ways to invest and scale up these approaches. We really appreciate the work that you do, and we really appreciate sharing your insights and experience with us here today. So thank you so much. I've seen that some questions have been popping up in the chat as we've been talking. So perhaps if each of the panelists have a chance to have a look in there and see if any of those questions are directed to them and respond, that would be really, really wonderful. But thank you so much for joining us. We're going to let you kind of...
Mm-hmm. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Dale. We wanted to give you a couple of minutes now just to kind of ruminate in everything that you've heard, digest a little bit. And Tony's actually just got a little activity for you to help you both look back on what we've done and also look forward on where we're going with this event before you go for a very well-deserved break in a few minutes. So Tony, over to you if you want to get everybody started. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Michelle. What I have up on the screen now is a question for everyone. And if Lena will share the link to this question in the chat, you all have access to it. And if you click on that link, this green question will pop up, and you can answer it by clicking on the screen anywhere or clicking on that little plus button there. And what we'd like to ask is, what is something that you heard in the first part of the event that was interesting or surprising to you? So please go ahead and click on the link in the chat, and then you can start typing in the things that you found to be interesting or surprising for you. And as these things come up, if you like, you can like the comment with a little thumbs up. And you can also comment on the comments by typing in as well. You'll see that on your own screen. Now we'll just take another few seconds to answer this first question, but you are welcome to keep it open on your own computer and continue to contribute through the break. In just another moment, we're going to move to another question.
Okay, Tony, the second question is in chat now.
Okay, and so we have another question prepared, And this time we're looking at a blue screen. And so I invite you to take a look at this question using the link that Lena just shared in the chat. We invite you to interact with this. In your view, what is the most important and urgent action needed to support agroecological, regenerative, and indigenous enterprises? You can go ahead and double click on the screen or use this plus button to share what you would like. And once again, I'll remind you that you can give a thumbs up to any comments that you appreciate or agree with, and you're welcome to add your own comments to those comments as well. And again, you can go right ahead and continue to make those contributions through the break. And at this time, I'll hand it back to Michelle.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Tony. So thank you all so much for your attention and the energy that you have brought to the first half of this event. We'd love to give you a 10-minute break now so that you can stretch, grab a water, do whatever you feel that you need. And if you could just be back here at 1:30, so we'll get started at exactly 1:30, that would be really, really wonderful. So please take your time, enjoy stretching or whatever you need to do, and we'll see you back here in 10 minutes to continue with our next panel, which is going to be looking more at experiences from global markets. So thank you all so much. So hi, everybody. Welcome back from the break. We still have 1 minute or so left, but I thought we would offer something for you early birds who have come back already to join us. We know you've been sitting for a while and in front of the screen for a while. So anybody who feels like standing up for a moment, feel free to do so. And perhaps we want to just do a little bit of stretching together. So arms up over the head, and then we could make our very best impressions of bananas, talking about agroecological products. So a very interesting one. One side to the other, trying to find that perfect bend for the export market. And then back to the other side again. Nice way to remind ourselves we're not just a face on a screen, but also a body sitting here. Taking that moment to reconnect. Fortunately, I can't see many of you, but I hope that I have a great bunch of bananas here. Coming back to the center, and sometimes when we sit so long in front of the computer, the eyes can feel a bit strained. So rubbing the hands together, getting nice and warm, and then closing the eyes and just placing the hands on top of the eyes, just giving them a rest for a moment. A Zoom break for the eyes. And as you're sitting here, relaxing the shoulders down away from the ears. And maybe just taking a moment to take some nice deep breaths all the way into the belly. Breathing in and out through the nose and drawing that breath all the way into the belly. Nice long inhalations and nice long exhalations. Just taking a moment to arrive back here in front of the screen, into our bodies, back into the session. You can slowly remove the hands and then maybe shake everything out one last time. So I hope that helped energize you for the next half of the program, which we're really excited to dive into now. thank you all for staying with us and sharing such amazing insights in the chat. I went to the break and saw I had 100 messages on the chat. So great to see that you're all bringing your questions and ideas in there as well. And we really welcome you to keep doing that also as we move into the next panel discussion. So without further ado, I would say we dive straight into that. And as I mentioned before the break, the idea with this second panel discussion is to showcase both entrepreneurs, service providers, and investors who have been more oriented to global markets for high value products, and to hear the experiences they've had, the insights that they want to share with us, and ideas they have for how we move forward to really scale these approaches. So we're really happy today to have Miguel with us from Educe Cooperativa in Mexico. We're very happy that, hi Miguel, very happy that Dana can join us from the Kellogg Foundation in the United States. And we also have Brian, who's representing Aseli Foundation, Aseli Africa in Kenya. And it's really a pleasure to have all of you here. Just a heads up to the translators. So Miguel will be speaking with us in Spanish today. Any of you that require simultaneous translation, please just be sure to hit that globe at the bottom of the screen and choose the language that you would like here. So firstly, thanks to all three of you for joining us. We're so happy to have these perspectives from literally different corners of the globe. And I thought we'd just start as we did the last panel. If you want to take 1 to 2 minutes each to share the essence of your work with us, how agroecology, regenerative and indigenous approaches play a role, and what your main activities are, that would be wonderful. Perhaps Dana, would you like to get us started? And you're on mute if you just want to quickly tap it. Thanks.
Hello, thank you. Certainly, it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. And again, thank you for having such an important and timely conversation. My name is Dana Francois, and I am the Program Officer for Family Economic Security at the Kellogg Foundation. And my work is in Haiti and in an interim capacity in Mexico. And my background is, in fact, in, broadly speaking, economic development and sustainable agriculture, primarily in Haiti. And really our focus as a foundation centers around children well-being and family well-being, and with values that we have a deep understanding that communities have the capacity to help themselves, and that the communities have the solutions to their own challenges. And these two pieces really drive the ways in which we do our work. And as a result, our work that really covers economic security is intended to be comprehensive. It is looking at food system through agroecological practices, particularly because we also recognize that there is a legacy of colonization that has impacted all the communities in which we work, and indigenous communities primarily. And as a result, it is incredibly important that we focus on how do we, on one end, support communities' effort to rebuild their institutions, protect their territory, own their cultural languages and practices, but also do so in a way that addresses key issues such as endemic poverty, food security, and in a way that really strengthens community leadership. Because we truly believe that even as we talk about global markets as an example, and they're critical components to really market access for production, agroecological production across a number of different value chains. But it's absolutely critical that this happens through the well-being, growth, strengthening of the communities where this work is happening, so that it benefits families and children. And in this capacity, we've worked for quite a long time with Educe. There's a number of colleagues, I'm happy to see Brian here, that are on the call that we connect with on a regular basis. And as Stephen has mentioned, system change also for us is a key component of how we tackle that work. And we interconnect it with education as an example in health, because we do believe that these pieces together are critical for community well-being and self-determination and sovereignty, as well as we think about it in the context of food.
Wonderful, important and comprehensive work. Thanks so much. And I know there is a connection between you and Miguel's organization. So Miguel, would you like to share more about the work that you're doing in Mexico?
Muchas gracias. Voy a hablar en español, como ya se mencionó. Soy Miguel Ángel Munguía, vivo en Yucatán, México. Trabajo con una cooperativa de nombre Duce, que existe hace casi 25 años y tenemos poco menos de 1000 apicultores asociados. Son apicultores de la vieja civilización maya. Ustedes conocerán el emblemático Chichén Itzá, que es una pirámide bellísima que existe aquí en Yucatán. Y bueno, los apicultores son maya hablantes y con ellos hemos trabajado en modelos asociativos desde hace 25 años. O sea, tenemos grupos comunitarios de apicultores, porque para nosotros la apicultura, digamos, aquí en la península de Yucatán es muy importante. Aquí se produce el 40% de la miel a nivel de todo México, y México juega un papel importante como productor y exportador de miel a nivel mundial. El problema era la cadena de valor, mucha intermediación, mucho coyotaje, le decimos en México, que impedía que el esfuerzo del trabajo del campesino tuviera un beneficio. Entonces, por eso nos asociamos, por eso hicimos una cooperativa y somos exportadores directos, acopiamos la miel de todos nuestros productores, la procesamos, la homogenizamos, la envasamos y la exportamos a los mercados internacionales. También vendemos un poco de miel a nivel nacional. Y bueno, también lo importante es que hemos logrado unas certificaciones. Somos certificados en el sistema Fair Trade, en el sistema de comercio justo, y también tenemos certificación orgánica. Ambas certificaciones nos han abierto puertas en el mercado, nos han permitido mejorar condiciones de vida en las comunidades, nos han permitido proteger el medio ambiente, nos han permitido evitar la migración campesina, nos han permitido incorporar a jóvenes y mujeres en actividades de este tipo. Entonces es una experiencia pues, que con gusto la comparto. Y bueno, amén del trabajo de las abejas en términos de polinización para favorecer la biodiversidad. Todos vivimos y trabajamos en una economía verde que permite el arraigo campesino, el bienestar de las comunidades y la protección del medio ambiente. Gracias.
Wonderful, such important and diverse work. Thank you, Miguel. And let's head now from Mexico all the way over to Kenya. Brian, can you give us some insights into your work?
Thanks, Michelle. Yes, and I work in Kenya. I work in East Africa, but I'm actually based in the US. So Brian Milder, I have two affiliations. One is with Aceli Africa, and the other is with CSAF, or the Council on Smallholder Agricultural Finance. I'm going to rewind just a little bit my personal journey into this work and how it connects. So in 2006, I began working for an impact investor called Root Capital, which makes loans to farmer enterprises, including Educe, in Africa and Latin America. And these are loans of about $100,000 to $2 million to farmer cooperatives and private enterprises that source from smallholders and connect them to markets. In 2012, Root Capital came together with 6 other social impact investors, Alterfine, Oiko Credit, Responsibility, and some others, to share learning and try to develop best practices around how to serve these businesses. We were all basically making it up as we went. There was no blueprint. This is an underserved market, and we found that it was quite challenging. So we had a lot of learning together, and a few years ago, we started talking about why there's a missing middle in agriculture, why limited capital flows to farmer enterprises like Educe. And we recognized from our own experiences the costs and risks of finding and serving these businesses. Most financial institutions are based in urban areas. It's much more profitable for them to serve clients that are nearby, whether that's a large manufacturing business or increasingly in the last 2 decades, microfinance customers that are in urban areas or densely populated peri-urban areas. And there's very little financial institutions who have people in rural areas. It hasn't been efficient to do that historically. So there's this well-known gap, but really there hadn't been much evidence around what the actual costs are to make these loans, what the profitability is. So we set out to gather that data, starting with our own members, the CSAF members. There are now 16 of them, but also going to local banks and other local lenders in East Africa. And we found that lending in agriculture is twice as risky as in other sectors, and that the returns are substantially lower. And so from that, we went to donors like the Swiss government, USAID, IKEA Foundation, and raised grant funding for a market incentive mechanism called Aceli Africa. And Aceli offers financial incentives to share risk and improve the profitability of making small loans. So really targeting that segment that Charles alluded to earlier, $25,000 to $500,000 loans, working in Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania. And we offer incentives that make it more profitable for lenders to make loans when those loans meet certain impact criteria. And we embed criteria around agroecological principles as well. So I'll stop there, but thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, Brian. And perhaps you could just tell us a little bit, what are the terms of those loans then for those receiving them? Just a final question.
Sure. So Aceli Africa doesn't set the terms of the loans. What we do is we find lenders that meet certain criteria and we accredit them to participate. And then we allow them to register loans with us. So a lender would go out and find a business, make a loan and agree on terms. And then we would provide incentives that make it more attractive for the lender to issue that loan. Of course, you've alluded to the high interest rates in East Africa. Some of the social lenders like Root Capital and members of CSAF typically lend at 9 to 11% in US dollars for export value chains. The local lenders are typically lending in local currency, and it varies. In Uganda these days, rates are in the low 20s. It just varies country by country. But one of the things that we're seeing is lenders are starting to lower their interest rates, and when they have the right incentives in place, they're willing to and want to serve more of these businesses. It's just very hard to make the economics work.
Great, thanks for clarifying that for us. Yeah, so we have Miguel here running an enterprise and two of you more on the financing and investment side. Perhaps we can start, Miguel, with what you're doing with Edulce, and could you share with us what you think the key factors have been for your success and perhaps the biggest lessons you've learned in your journey so far?
Con mucho gusto, muchas gracias. Yo creo que un factor de éxito importante en nuestro caso fue nuestra capacidad de asociarnos. Es decir, yo, productor de miel, me asocio con el vecino porque juntos podemos hacer un volumen para poder armar un contenedor y exportarlo directamente a los mercados internacionales. Hay que tomar como referencia que todos los pequeños productores tienen fundamentalmente dos actividades económicas. Una es la producción de la miel y otra es producción de alimentos para el autoconsumo. La miel forzosamente está vinculada al mercado por la cantidad de miel que se produce. O sea, un pequeño productor va a producir 900 kilos, son 3 tambores, pero nosotros necesitamos 72 tambores para armar un contenedor y poder exportar. Entonces, diría que la asociación ha sido un factor de éxito, unirnos para unidos hacer volumen y poder ingresar a las cadenas de valor como exportadores directos. Otro de los factores de éxito que yo podría mencionar es nuestras certificaciones. Nosotros hemos obtenido la certificación de comercio justo por los valores éticos que pregonamos, que son transparencia, no discriminación, protección del medio ambiente, no explotación de mano de obra infantil, y inclusión, no discriminación de ningún tipo, ni por género, ni preferencias sexuales de ningún tipo. Entonces, los valores de comercio justo nos permitieron obtener la certificación y con ello empresas éticas donde hay consumidores potenciales. Uno de los elementos importantes ha sido como el binomio entre nosotros como productores y los consumidores social y ambientalmente responsables. Eso para nosotros ha sido fundamental, que también tiene que ver con otro certificado que tenemos, que es el certificado orgánico. Nosotros tenemos 2 certificaciones, somos productores orgánicos y somos productores de comercio justo. Ambos nos han permitido accesar a nuevos mercados y ambos nos han permitido hacer como un binomio entre nosotros como productores y los consumidores ambiental y socialmente responsables, que son claves. La gran mayoría de esos productores están en el norte global y nosotros estamos en el sur global. Creo que esos son uno de los elementos que podría compartir como factores de éxito. Y bueno, creo que también podemos decir que la mejoría de las condiciones de vida de nuestros productores. O sea, ya no tienen que emigrar a los Estados Unidos o a la Ribera Maya, que es donde están los centros turísticos, sino pueden vivir en sus comunidades, pueden vivir con sus familias y no se rompe el tejido social. Se mantiene la cohesión familiar, la cohesión cultural, la identidad como pueblo maya, y viven de sus recursos, viven de su territorio, viven de sus medios de vida, que es la apicultura, que es la siembra de maíz, la siembra de frijol, la crianza de animales de traspatio. Entonces, digamos, evitar la migración y vivir de su territorio es como un factor de éxito para nosotros también. Y bueno, no se diga también el tema de ambiental, o sea, las abejas son polinizadoras, las abejas juegan un rol fundamental. Se dice que si no hubiera abejas, perderíamos el 70% de los alimentos, porque las abejas hacen un rol importante para polinización, para los alimentos, pero también para la biodiversidad. Entonces, digamos que somos un pulmón que protege el medio ambiente. En esta zona de la península de Yucatán tenemos todavía selva nativa, está amenazada, no puedo decir que no, pero seguimos luchando por protegerla, conservarla, porque es el medio de vida del pueblo indígena maya de esta península de Yucatán en México.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Miguel. You make me want to try that honey. It sounds amazing when you're describing it and all of the products that come out of those systems. As I understand it, Dana, you've actually been supporting Dulce with investments and different grants. What have been some of the lessons that you've learned about using different forms of financial support to really foster transformative enterprises like what Miguel has just described?
I think that one of the starting points is really, we must take the time to understand the context and understand the communities where partners such as Educe are operating. Because when we started our partnership, it was very clear that Educe had a vision and had really deep relationships within the community and had trust. Because I think that, I think maybe Stephen or someone else earlier mentioned, how do you foster adoption of practices and transformation, and the trust is required to make that happen. So it was very important for us to understand the context within which Educe was operating and what was required to actually see the economic transformation that Miguel just talked about in terms of the livelihood, in a way that is in alignment with agroecological practices to protect the biodiversity of the communities and also protect the territory, maintain cultural traditions, and also address and raise policy issues along the way, because that was very critical and important for beekeepers in the region to continue to be able to kind of protect their way of life and continue to protect the value chain. So understanding the community and understanding the partner and understanding what it is that they're trying to accomplish, I would say step one, because from that, then it becomes very clear that the partnership has to be a long-term partnership. And our partnership spans over years, recognizing that at different stages of the partnership, different things are required. As an example, now we're in conversations about how do we increase and strengthen the capacity of Educe, as an example, related to their future goals and scaling and in deepening the work that they're doing and the reach that they have with beekeepers. So from that standpoint, our place-based approach focused in the Yucatan Peninsula in partnership with Educe was definitely one of the key things. I would say in addition to that, in terms of successful kind of key piece is around also recognizing who do we need to be as philanthropy to be an effective partner, and how we can leverage our grant dollars to serve as a signal to fellow philanthropic organizations, to leverage those dollars as an example as a catalyst for different funding, to also support not just the work that Educe is doing in supporting smallholder farmers and beekeepers, but also the capacity of Educe themselves as an institution to be able to continue to do that work. And I would say another critical element to really kind of a successful partnership is also the learning piece, because many of these issues and challenges we're learning as we go, and we're learning through the partnership that we have with an organization such as EDUCE. As an example, our systems change approach, which really looks at how do we strengthen the ecosystem around food production, the agroecological ecosystem in the region around the particular value chain, then also pushes us to think about how do we strengthen the financing ecosystem. And we've established partnerships with organizations such as NOOP, who's looking into doing more investment for that tranche that Brian just talked about and others talked about of the 50,000 to the 500,000, where there's a significant gap for smallholder farmers as well. So we see it as a very critical point for us to take the time to think about how do we push ourselves to make the necessary investment with partners like EDUCE and others, also because recognizing that EDUCE does also need other partners to be effective as an ecosystem builder. It's absolutely a critical piece. And I think the last piece that I would mention is flexibility, because on two fronts. One, in terms of the tools and resources. As an example, particularly over the last year or two, with the deepening of climate change in our indigenous communities, we're recognizing that our terms, as an example of our grants, need to be increasingly flexible. So general operating grants, more long-term grants, more of a patient capital approach is essential. And it's becoming more of the norm as opposed to a one-off. So for us to think about what is required to make that more consistent is something that we have to think about. And we also have to think about how do we support EDUCE's work, as an example, related to advocacy and policy, not just locally, but also globally, as we think about how do we protect agroecological practices and communities and indigenous communities' right to their way of life. Then there's a way in which philanthropy can leverage its voice, its connection to push those conversations. And I think someone else mentioned legal frameworks around how do we strengthen a legal framework around blended finance. These are definitely some of the things that we're actively engaging in conversations as a foundation with our investment partners, both internally and externally, that I think are critical for the work that EDUCE is doing and others like EDUCE, both today and in the future.
Now you have some really rich experience and learnings there. Thanks for sharing that. Brian, I'm interested from your perspective, how do you think that the ASELI model can support agroecological, regenerative, indigenous enterprises? And do you think that it's a model that can be replicated in other parts of the world?
I do. I think that one of the challenges that we've heard today from Miguel, but also from Krishna Gopal and from Dale, is the costs and the time that it takes to build up a farmer-centric enterprise. And all of the enterprises that we featured today are led by very talented leaders and working very closely with communities, and have been working for 15 to 20 plus years. And the journey to get there is so hard. It's not profitable immediately for farmers to adopt the types of practices that we're talking about. It's not profitable for enterprises to aggregate them and support them and connect them to markets right away. You have to get up to a certain scale, and it's not profitable for lenders to make $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 loans. And so I think that the work that's being done, whether it's around true cost accounting or blended finance, figuring out how can we recognize and put value, both social value in terms of livelihoods and natural ecological value into the equation is critical. And we need to figure out how to do that more systematically, transparently, in ways that are comparable, and shift the capitalist system fundamentally. If we can't do that, then we're going to be stuck with a handful of really iconic, beautiful organizations like EDUCE and Comaco, and a much larger mass of really struggling farmers and fledgling organizations. So ASELI is a model that's attempting to do that in one marketplace, 4 sets of countries. We're trying to create a nudge, basically say to lenders, if you go out and look harder and take a little more risk to serve businesses that you might not have otherwise served, we'll make it, we'll basically absorb those extra costs for you. We're willing to pay you to do that because the income that's going to be generated, or the impact that's going to be generated, far outweighs the cost to us and our donors. So I think that in the medium term, we need to demonstrate that that value proposition in fact holds, that we are able to generate that social environmental impact at a relatively efficient cost. And then over time, that needs to be embedded into the policy environment and fundamentally into the economy and how capitalism functions.
Yeah, a much bigger system change question. Yeah. So you all have a lot of experience working either as entrepreneurs or investors. For the last couple of minutes, I would love to hear from each of you one thing you would go and tell your younger self when you were just starting out in this space, whether it was as an investor or as an entrepreneur, perhaps to support those who are just starting their journey now. What do you think is the one thing you wish you knew? It could be personal or professional, whatever you would like to share. I put you on the spot here.
Bueno,
As
puedo
you mentioned the
comenzar yo.
importance of capacity building.
Yo recomendaría que se hiciera un buen plan de negocios en las inversiones. Es decir, se requieren recursos para la capacitación, se requiere recursos para la asistencia técnica, se requiere recursos para la formación en los criterios de comercio justo y en la normativa que implica la certificación orgánica, pero también se requieren recursos para infraestructura. Entonces, el tema del cambio climático también nos afecta porque tenemos que ser resilientes. Es decir, la floración de la miel se ha cambiado. Antes era muy estática. Era claro que en un mes determinado floreaba un tipo de flor, en otro mes otro tipo de flor. Y por el cambio climático, a veces no florea, a veces florea 2 meses antes o 2 meses después. Y eso impide como un sistema de planeación. Entonces, yo creo que lo que nosotros hemos hecho con la asistencia técnica es tener apicultores bien capacitados que cambien las eras, que protejan el monte, que siembren plantas melíferas y que permita que la actividad se mantenga sólida y evite los cambios en el clima. Entonces, el asunto es los recursos que se requieren tienen que combinarse en 2 aspectos. El aspecto de la capacitación, la formación, que tiene que ver con los elementos valorales, pero también con los técnicos específicamente, en nuestro caso, control de varroa, cambio de ceras, generación de nuevos panales, y con la parte valoral que es democracia, transparencia, rendición de cuentas, es inclusión de jóvenes, inclusión de mujeres, esa parte valoral. Y la parte de infraestructura, o sea, hay que planear también la parte de infraestructura porque necesitas forzosamente una bodega donde acopiar la miel, necesitas tambores, necesitas digamos, un tanque homogenizador, necesitas vehículos para mover, entonces es la combinación de los 2 elementos. Nosotros con el apoyo de Kelos hemos recibido mucho apoyo para la parte de capacitación, asistencia técnica, los 2 componentes, la parte valoral y la parte, digamos, de técnica específicamente. Entonces, yo recomendaría que cualquier empresa, cualquier cooperativa que quieran hacer, que piense en ese plan de necesidades, porque las fundaciones ayudan mucho, pero también de las ganancias tienen uno que retener un poquito de esas ganancias para hacer inversiones propias. Y la combinación de las subvenciones con las inversiones son las que nos pueden potenciar como empresa social y ambientalmente sostenible.
Thanks so much, Miguel. So one thing you would tell yourself is a business plan, but with many other caveats in there. So a lot of great information to share. Thank you. Dana and Brian, what's the one thing you would tell a younger version of yourself?
I think that I would say to a younger version of myself that to trust that the solution resides, there's a piece of the solution in all of us. And what that means in practical terms, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the conversation today and other similar conversations, it's because in many ways our sectors can be very siloed, whether it's philanthropy, whether it's impact investing, whether it's partners on the ground, smallholder farmers and ecosystem builders, intermediaries, and so on, and even practitioners in many ways. They can be very siloed. However, the more that we engage intentionally in conversation with a solutions-oriented mindset and putting really community at the center, because that's another lesson that remains forever true for me, is that the expertise is so clear. The expertise is so clear in community and at the level of indigenous communities that I think the focus is more, how can we get out of our own way related to how do we channel resources, how do we move capital markets, how do we use the different tools we have and orchestrate them so that together we can be more effective to channel towards the solutions that are on the ground, as opposed to sometimes I think reinventing the wheel with good intent, but I find that it is not necessarily, sometimes the solutions are simple and they're effective. So it's a matter of getting together and moving intelligently and intentionally to apply them. So I think that's what I would say. I would say that reach across the aisle and connect and listen with an intent to understand and to share, and the solutions emerge, and spend time in community at the center of all of this, because I think someone in the chat asked a question as to what's the value of agroecology for community. I think Anne raised that question. What's the value of agroecology for communities? And I think for me, what I've seen to be true over and over, spending time a day or half a day in community to really listen as to why this matters for community really provides solutions that are clear and that are easily followed to some degree with the work that is required. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that's what I would say to my younger self. And maybe would have shortened some of the pathways to learning, but I think experience brings more knowledge, and it's a good thing.
Wonderful. Yeah, the value of co-creating solutions. Thanks so much. Brian, what's your lesson for us?
I would say start as close to the problem as you can. I did that for the first 5 years or so when I worked at Root Capital. I probably visited 200 or 300 farmer enterprises and just got a feel for the challenges. And if anything, I'd go back and spend 6 months or more living and being fully embedded in an enterprise and getting that much closer.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you all so much. It's useful wisdom for all of us to take forward. And thank you all for the really, really important work that you do in this space. And we wish you all the best for your efforts to amplify it, and hope that some connections are found here today that support that process. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So we're moving now to the final part of our program for you, and that's with some closing remarks from a few different perspectives. So first of all, I'm really happy to introduce Tanya to you. She's the co-founder and director of Clar Mondial, and she has, I guess, over 15 years experience as an investment professional, particularly in the environmental finance sector, but she was really one of the people spearheading the Food Securities Fund that was just instated last year. So Tanya, we're super happy to have you here with us. Thanks for coming in and sharing your perspectives for what opportunities there really are for commercial capital in this space in the future, and what we need to leverage those opportunities. Thanks. Over to you.
Great. Well, thanks. It's such a pleasure, and it's been really great to listen to all the speakers so far. And I think I had some expectations for this event, but they were certainly exceeded. So my name is Tanya Havman. I have been in the environmental finance space for about 20 years, and I actually initially studied tropical environmental sciences and tropical soils. So it's great to be coming back to agriculture. And Clar Mondial, we advise the Food Securities Fund, which is a blended finance fund, which took us 5 years to launch and was very difficult. And we are getting on board institutional capital now, so commercial institutional capital. And we also structure different investments within supply chains, both using commercial and concessionary capital. So I've been asked to provide some perspectives and ideas on what needs to happen to get more institutional capital into agroecological enterprises. But first, I just want to contextualize a little bit on what's been happening in the past couple of years, because I think it's important to just give some context. So I think we have seen increased efforts through regulations, for example, to get better connectivity between the real economy and the financial economy. And those are, for example, SFDR regulations in Europe, and also some court cases and litigation, as well as sort of guidance around risk management rules for financial institutions. At the same time, with COVID-19, we saw very highly indebted poor countries going back into very high debt levels, and some like Zambia actually defaulting on their debts. So having very little fiscal space to actually support investments into some of these critical issues. And along with that, increasing environmental and political instability. So while the kind of investment need increased, the risk perception, at least, if not the actual risks, also increased. At the same time, we remain with record low interest rates here in Europe. So for example, there are a couple of countries with negative interest rates. And I think the disconnect between those who have access to capital and those who need capital has just widened, unfortunately. So I think there are opportunities, for example, with blended finance to create channels that better connect the two. So do I think it'll be possible to mobilize a type and scale of capital needed to transition, including climate action and on food systems? I think in general, yes, but it's pretty clear we do need more contributions from the private sector, and not just private finance, but also from corporations. I think we've seen that ODA, while it increased slightly last year, it was still on average at 0.3% of gross national income, which is below, obviously, the 0.7%, which is recommended. And most of that came in the form of equity rather than grants. So I think the space for private sector to fill, because ODA has pulled back and been reformulated, is kind of increased. And I think we need kind of private sector to step in different parts of the ecosystem value chain. So private sector is obviously required for longer term financing, for taking initial venture risk and equity investments, but also in things like working capital. I think on the working capital gap alone, the last press release I saw from the World Trade Organization was that financing gap amongst emerging markets SMEs is $1.5 trillion and growing. And within this ecosystem, obviously, we need institutional investors who are effectively the investors that manage money professionally, and so have fiduciary responsibilities over that. And some required practices and some practices that are there because they are perceived best practice around, for example, asset allocation and risk management. So there's been a lot of talk about blended finance. So I think important just to say what I think the definition is when you use concessionary capital to help mobilize additional private sector capital or investments. And I think, we will probably need that. So for example, grant funding to test out new business ideas, money that comes in a subordinated position or is able to absorb more risk within a structure, results-based payments I would also put in that. I think these are all things that should be considered. In terms of who, I speak with a lot of banks. We do some advising on quite some loans, and I think it would be great to see more people from the finance and investment community consider nuances to their business models, or even how to expand on their business models in terms of types of channels, types of intermediaries, and how they maybe work with other partners. And I also want to mention that with our fund, we do actually leverage value chains. And I do think that larger corporates, in terms of things like science-based target commitments and insetting and offsetting, as well as their procurement and supply chain financing initiatives, can actually play a role in getting more funding into local businesses that actually have measurable social and environmental contributions. So also in terms of an investor's perspective, I have seen quite a few businesses that lay themselves as regenerative or agroecological. And I looked at a business in East Africa, for example, recently, and it was a fantastic business. Ultimately, they didn't need the type of funding that we had, but it was a business that transitioned from having about 5 different revenue streams to having about 12 or 15 as a transition to having sort of a more agroecological approach. And I do understand that you need higher technical skills, both to run such a business as well as an investor to assess such a business. So that obviously increases a bit of the transaction costs. And means that investors do need more technical expertise. Unfortunately, also, most investors do look at track records and will look for comparables in investment products. So I think we need, more funds that are doing similar-ish things that people can start to benchmark them, or, have funds that have quite some years of expertise so people can see that this is actually a segment or a strategy that's worth looking into. Unfortunately, most institutional investors don't have a mandate for investing either in first-time funds, as we experienced, or with small businesses in emerging markets, or directly into agriculture. But they do oftentimes invest in intermediaries, and there are exceptions to those. So, for example, AXA have an impact fund where they do actually make some smaller equity investments. So I think it's challenging to get these large pools of money that are sitting out there with very, very low returns often to channel them into emerging markets and some of these communities and businesses that actually need the funding and could probably meet in the middle somewhere in terms of risk-adjusted return. I would say, I think someone here in the conversation has mentioned around business model. I think I see a lot of NGOs and local enterprises, wanting to attract funding, but maybe not thinking through properly, for your business model, what kind of funding do you need and how do you sort of segue from one type of funder to another? So maybe you start out with some grant funding or being part of an incubator, getting some angel investor, and then over time getting money from an impact first investment fund to then maybe getting bank financing and then sort of transitioning over to larger lenders or larger private equity entities. So I think, looking at your business model in terms of your assets, what capital is needed for what, and the amount, timing, and reliability of potential returns or cost savings. And then based on that, who are suitable investors? Are you looking primarily for international investors because you need to have access to those skill sets or markets, or because you can access and you can absorb funding in your business with foreign currency, US dollars or euros? Or is it more appropriate for you to look for local capital, so local pension funds? So for example, in Uganda, there is a fund that has been seeded by a local pension fund, also because they're willing to take risk and long-term risk in Uganda shillings. I think investments can be to some extent structured to reduce various types of risk. And I think it's important to try to look at those risks and classify them and see, what are systemic risks, what are short-term risks, and then where can I maybe get partnerships with other private sector partners or NGOs or foundations to mitigate those kind of as the timing and in the way that most fits those risks. So I think with all of that blended finance has an important role to play. I think the only caveat I would say is that we do unfortunately see that for very good reasons, because providers of concessionary capital need to see that there's additionality on impact for their money, that oftentimes there are reasonably high sort of M&E costs or costs to show that you are additional. But I think for fund managers with intent or for businesses with intent, I think that shouldn't be considered as such a high burden, but I think it does dissuade some other people from engaging too much with blended finance. So I guess in summary that I would really encourage cross-sector collaboration. And I think as we move into a more complicated world where we need sort of people with different expertise together, I would really encourage you to reach out and find other partners within the NGOs, scientific and other business communities to support. And I think finally, we definitely also need some policy support to enable that. So I hope that any of this was useful, and excited to keep in touch or connect with some of you.
I would say very useful. Thank you so much, Tanya. I think I learned a ton in that 10 minutes. So really, really appreciate that you shared your wisdom. And Yeah, did such a great job outlining for us the landscape of both risks and opportunities, and nice to hear that you're optimistic going forward. So that gives us all a lot of hope. I think some questions came in for you in the chat there, so if you wouldn't mind just responding to them if you have a chance, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over now to Rex, who is the director of the Transformational Investing in Food Systems organization, one of the hosts of this event. And Rex is going to give us some insights into how this particular event actually is situated in a larger landscape of projects and initiatives, and what is on the horizon for those looking forward, and indeed how you might be able to get involved. So over to you, Rex.
Thank you, Michelle. And I'll quickly point out that don't leave yet, because Tanya just ended with a comment about needing some policy support, and we've heard that from other speakers as well. And our next speaker is actually going to make some of those connections between private finance, enterprise, and the role of public finance as well. So stay tuned for that in just a minute. Just a few comments. First of all, I'm just really excited to see so many people interested in all these complex topics of investing in food systems transformation, and who have joined today's event. So that's been really encouraging and really exciting. Obviously, our organizations, Biovision Foundation and TIFS, are working with many partners, including today's speakers and panel members, on a range of related activities. So I just wanted to point out a few opportunities for those of you who are interested to join in some of these activities, or just express your interest with us. So for instance, the TIFS initiative has been building a community of foundations, investors, asset managers, enterprises, service providers, who are conducting regular conversations about about business models and different forms of financing, and how to sort of match the needs of transformative enterprises with the right types of capital. You heard earlier that the Biovision Foundation will be releasing the agroecology criteria tool for business later on this year. TIFS is also starting a project with some partners to develop an assessment tool for investment funds, again, to look at how do these funds align with goals of creating more sustainable and just food systems. So going to be in touch with us if you're interested in that work, if you want to contribute to sort of co-designing those tools or using them and seeing how they might apply. We have heard that the Biovision Foundation will be studying the feasibility of an agroecology enterprise accelerator in East Africa. And then Biovision and TIFS will also be organizing some follow-up activities. So if you're interested in any of this, let us know. Stephanie Pondini is the point of contact at the Biovision Foundation. I'll be your point of contact at TIFS. We'll put our emails in the chat, and please reach out to us either following the event today or in response to an email that you'll get from us next week with a copy of the recording and some of the other materials. So that's just by way of a quick update, and back to you, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Rex. And you'll have Rex's contact details in the chat too, if you would like to connect with him and explore your role in this landscape. So our final contributor today is Marie-Laure, and she's joining us from the Swiss Agency for Development Corporation, so a government organization. And we've asked her to come along, firstly, because their organization has kindly supported this event this evening, and secondly, to share her wealth of experience and give some insights into how we can really better coordinate public and private capital in this space and accelerate and the impact that we're all looking to see. So Marie-Laure, over to you. Thanks so much for joining us and for your support of this event.
Thanks a lot, and thanks everyone for the great exchanges. I've been in many Zoom meetings ultimately, but very impressed by the lively discussion and the chat, and I think it's not finished. So I'd like to give a few perspective from our role as a development agency from the Swiss government on the topic of agroecology and investment in general. Switzerland has been engaged and has been very active now for many years, but especially in the last 12 months in the preparation of the Food System Summit in promoting sustainable food system and agroecology as a way to transform our food systems. And from SDC side as such, we have, for instance, set ourselves some targets and priorities to increase our investment in agroecology in the coming 4 years. We are now around 16 to 20% of our portfolio, which is related to agroecology, and we wish to reach 50% in 2024. We're also very determined to work in a systemic approach, trying to break the different thematic silo we had in the past, and we are not the only one struggling with this issue. But what does it mean concretely? That means addressing jointly agroecology, sustainable agriculture and production, inclusive markets, responsible investment, and improve nutrition from healthy and sustainable diets. That means also considering the connection between food, livelihood, environment, and health. This is definitely not an easy task, and it increases the complexity in the way we engage with the partners. So it's quite clear that we cannot do that alone, and we need to engage simultaneously with all stakeholders, being farmers, consumers, civil society organization, research institution, and the private and specifically the financial sector. This resonates also with the understanding that agroecology is at the same time, as most of you know, a science, not only a science, but also a set of practices and a movement. And we think that in this movement, we need all types of actors on board, while ensuring the inclusion in particular of smallholder farmers and the vulnerable consumers. And I think this link between producers and consumer is crucial. We heard it from Miguel in his example, and that's probably a way of pushing the agroecological agenda. We have from SDC side developed in the last year different public-private partnership or public-private development partnership, as we like to call them, and in particular with impact investors that are ready to support the challenges of smallholders. And we have heard it now many times, and I completely share the analysis of one of the first speakers from AFSA, the difficulty to access finances, especially for this small and medium enterprises, the aggregators, the cooperatives. And in that sense, we support these agri-SMEs with different blended finance instruments. We have heard a lot about it, being social impact incentives or technical assistance in order to attract and mobilize private investment. We understand our role in these blended finance tools and mechanism as a way to de-risk investment and at the same time deepen the development impact of the investees. So in this context, we try to push for more consideration on agroecology and agroecological principles, looking a bit beyond the ESG, the environmental, social, and governance criteria. And the example mentioned by Brian from ASELI Africa, this is one of SDC supported initiatives. Another one is also tackling these missing middle, and this is SNOOP. I think Dana mentioned it as well. SNOOP means Smallholder Safety Net Upscaling Program. And I think we see very promising first results in this setup and program. At the same time, we completely share the view that of the importance of true cost and true value of food that should be addressed and further explored, because I don't think we're very clear how we're going to do that very concretely. So this is definitely something to follow in the coming years. As a governmental agency, we see our role, as it was mentioned, at different level. I would say there is a policy level, there is an international policy level, and one of the examples is what is happening in Rome at the Committee on World Food Securities. That's where we've been pushing for different policies, and related to the discussion of today, it's of course, for instance, the responsible agriculture investment principle, the RAI, it's already maybe 10 years ago. More recently, the voluntary guidelines on food system and nutrition, or the policy recommendation on agroecology and other innovative approaches. It's very clear from our perspective that this is not enough, that these policy guidance are very important and need the backup of the international community, at the same time need to be implemented. And we have also a role at this implementation level, and that's what we do, for instance, in translating this policy principle in concrete measures, for instance, in the ASEAN region, on a tool how the private sector can apply the right principle, for instance. Another way to do that, it's contributing directly to different funds, and one of them is the ABC Fund, Agricultural Business Capital Funds, where SDC as a public investors will help leveraging private investors with the aim to support underserved segment of the agriculture value chain. A third option and way to do it is looking for innovative approaches, and that's what we're doing currently in an initiative which is still in development, where we would like to contribute to a transformative land investment, where investors improve their practices and consider also the agroecological principle in their business models and in their relationship with the local communities. So in conclusion, for SDC, we see our role to continue our commitment and to advocate for agroecology in different spaces. One of them is the dialogue we have with our multilateral partner. Two of them are Switzerland priority partner. It's the CGIR, the International Research Centers, and IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. With the research, international research agenda, we see a big opportunity to have science and the scientific community also contributing to the topic. There is a recently created platform working on that, the Transformative Partnership Platform, and that will play this interface between science and policies. With IFAD, agroecology was always in our discussion, and we're very happy to see that IFAD has recently published a report. I've put it in the chat, a stock taking report, where they show that almost 50% of a selection of 200 projects, 50% of them apply at least partially agroecological practices. These represent an investment of $8 billion US. And they also acknowledge that agroecology contributes to IFAD mainstreaming priorities being gender, climate change, nutrition, youth, and indigenous people inclusion. And also in relation to one of the last comment, we're also starting a more structured dialogue with the World Bank Group, and also in the future with the different regional development banks on the same topic. So I think it's a long journey, but we see some promising signals for many of these multilateral partners. Finally, in Switzerland itself, we're convinced that exchanging and collaborating with NGOs, farmer organizations, cities that play a very crucial roles, research institutions, private sector actors, but also other federal institutes in federal offices are in Switzerland. So it's not about only agriculture, it's also environment and public health. It's probably the best way to find appropriate solution. We're looking forward to contribute to Switzerland pathway for food system transformation as defined in a recently approved 2030 Sustainable Development Strategy. And I would like to finish with the Food System Summit coming in a few days from now. We definitely welcome the opportunity offered by the process of the summit, and especially the creation of coalition. Somebody was asking about that. So this agroecology coalition is starting to be created, and some countries like Switzerland has already announced officially that we will join it. And we're very convinced that it will be an important vehicle to bring together, and hopefully many of the people who are on the call today, and that jointly we will be able to contribute and invest in the transformation of food system. So hope to see many of you in the coming months and years in this new space. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Marie-Laure, for that really rich insight into the breadth of collaborations and ecosystems that SDC is involved with. And thanks also to SDC for supporting this event today, together with the United Nations Environment Programme, the Agroecology Fund, and the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. So without this support, this event wouldn't be possible. And of course, without your energy and commitment to stay with us over this last 2 hours, the event wouldn't have been possible. So thank you to everyone that has brought in your comments and perspectives in the chat. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much to all our wonderful contributors. We hope that from the insights that they have shared with us today, you really leave knowing there is a vibrant business sector that is applying the approaches of agroecology, regenerative and indigenous approaches to really transform our food system. And so we hope that gives you inspiration for the work that you do. And perhaps you found some contact points that help support you as you move forward with your work. Please do keep in contact with us. You'll find the email addresses of both Rex and Stephanie in the chat. They would love to hear from you if you have any ideas for how you could collaborate or leverage the work that you're doing in the field and in your parts of the world. Thank you all very much. We wish you a wonderful evening or rest of the day, depending where you find yourselves. And please do stay in touch, and best of luck for your important work. Thank you.